All right, sorry about that, guys. I accidentally hit the wrong button and cut off the chapter. So this chapter is going to be two parts. Let's continue. Impersonal consideration would indicate that very few of the first Christian martyrs were actually killed for their beliefs. Most of them were arrested for sedition and executed for crimes against the solidarity of the state. The apostate emperor Julian, the noblest of all Romans and a man of the highest personal integrity, as well as a student of the deepest classical philosophies, sums up his dislike for the Christians, of which sect at one time he had been a member, simply and directly in better words than most of the other members were able to use. Julian never was able to understand why the Christians had a special predilection for sinners. The church was apparently developing the idea that the worst sinner made the greatest saint. Julian regarded his attitude as highly detrimental to the state. This attitude as highly detrimental to the state, because it encouraged delinquency by rewarding corruption instead of virtue. He also regarded as little less than seditious the Christian doctrine that all men are born sinners due to Adam's lamentable weakness. He also heartily disliked the political activity of various Christian groups, which were attempting to destroy by every possible means, perfidious or otherwise, the pagan Roman Empire. He resented, furthermore, that a class of people within the boundaries of the empire, for the most part the poorest educated and of least estate, should fanatically expound a belief that they were the sole possessors of truth, that all other gods were demons, all other philosophers frauds, and all other institutions heretical. It is possible that the emperor's annoyance was well founded. If the attitude of converts 2,000 years ago resembled the attitude of certain modern Christian fanatics, one gains a greater degree of sympathy for the plight of Romans having a faith thrust upon them without the right to say nay. Once the prejudice against Christians had reached violent proportions, crimes were unquestionably committed against sincere and innocent people. One has only to consider the Inquisition to realize how the Christians themselves resented any imaginary or real interference with their own dogma. Christians have tortured more Christians and pagans for their beliefs than ever suffered martyrdom under the Caesars. A religion, to be secure, to be noble, to be truly sufficient, must be established upon a great philosophy. It must appeal to both the reason and the heart. It must call to itself only the noblest and best, and acknowledge as members only those whose virtues merit such inclusion. The Christian Church never did this, or held these ideals, thus bringing much persecution upon itself, and also persecuting itself most gravely. At the time of the introduction of Christianity, the Roman Empire was not in the state of corruption into which it afterwards fell as the result of internecine strife. I think I'm saying that right. Internecine strife, which I'm assuming means internal strife. The Romans celebrated the rites of Eleusis and of Dionysus, derived from the Greeks. They performed, likewise, the rituals of Isis, Osiris, and Serapis, and they had begun to accept the mysteries of Mithras, a Persian importation. The magnificent paintings which still survive upon the walls of the Via of Dionysus at Pompeii prove beyond a doubt that some, at least among the Romans, were true to the most enlightened mysteries that the world has ever known. Recent research is building up evidence to indicate that it was actually the Christians who burned Rome during the reign of Nero. The increasing body of archaeology and historical material available today is reversing some of their opinions of the past. If it be true that Christians actually burned Rome, then the displeasure of the Romans and the efforts to destroy the cult could hardly be regarded as persecution. Fanaticism is a byproduct of blind faith. When the emotions are stirring to an intensity of feeling and the mind is left unsatisfied or unfed, the result is frequently a form of hysteria or temporary insanity. This is the reason why it is so necessary to discover the true philosophical meaning beneath the Christian faith, so that the intelligence may support belief and Christianity become a vital, living force in world affairs, instead of a helpless observer of war and crime among men. There are abundant indications of philosophical footings in the Christian religion. What is necessary is a general reform, new and complete translations of the Bible with various possible alternative renderings from the earliest Greek manuscripts, an admission that much is not known and not knowable, and most of all, an attempt to reconcile Christianity with the great philosophies of the ancient and modern worlds, rather than the preservation of an attitude of isolation. As long as there is fanaticism, there will be martyrs. But other great philosophies have been promulgated without violence, because honesty of thinking appeals equally to all men. This just reminded me of, you know, it reminded me when he said that, like, the first people that came to my mind were like Giordano Bruno, who was burnt at the stake for his promotion of Hermetic philosophy, and then Hypatia, who was a woman philosopher back in the Alexandrian time period, who got kidnapped and got her the skin of her body torn off her bones, scraped from her bones with seashells for promoting the truth behind these religions and the philosophical roots of them. So, I mean, there's been it's probably those same fanatics that he's talking about, in fact. But it's just funny because the philosophers have certainly not been unscathed by this stuff, but it actually makes sense. It probably was the unlearned, well, it certainly was. It was the unlearned barbarians who just couldn't accept another point of view, who felt like they had to scrape the skin and muscle off a woman's bones for daring to speak the truth. That's insanity. Astronomy is one of the 7 keys to the understanding of the New Testament. Let me read that again. Astronomy is one of the 7 keys to the understanding of the New Testament. Relics of astrology, worship of the heavenly bodies, and cosmogony, consideration of the shape and order of the universe, are to be found in every important religious system. The 12 apostles of the New Testament are identical in meaning with the 12 jewels upon the breastplate of the high priest of Israel. At some remote time, the zodiacal constellations were delineated among the star groups approximately paralleling the terrestrial equator. As these star groups do not resemble, in most cases, the creature or symbol assigned to them, the origin of the system must have been an arbitrary allocation according to the laws of ancient theology. The belief of Ptolemy that the sun annually moved through the 12 signs of the zodiac, which were its many mansions, is frequently reflected in religious symbolism. Many medieval cathedrals throughout Europe are ornamented with zodiacal symbols, and in some cases these signs are actually associated with sacred persons. It is exceedingly dubious that the original historical Jesus actually had 12 apostles. If he did by chance select this number, it was because he was aware of the astronomical significance. The destruction of numerous Gospels after the Nicene Council indicates that many other apostles whose names have not survived may have been closely associated with the Master and his work. The Church, however, following Egyptian and Greek precedent, arbitrarily fixed upon 12, thus indicating that it was aware of the sanctity peculiar to this number. In the astronomical symbolism, the sun entering into the various signs in sequence takes upon itself the phases, attributes, and aspects of those signs through which the solar force was said to be mediated or modified. Now, that is the signs that the sun is in. Each sign, if you look at it as a cosmic clock, and each sign is essentially a number, each position of the sun in those signs has a distinct effect upon this earth. Think of the angle of the sun when it's first rising in the morning. That angle has a particular awakening effect upon plant life, animal life, humans, everything. That particular angle has a very specific effect. Each angle that the sun then finds itself in, if you're picturing a clock, each angle that the sun finds itself in throughout the day and throughout the year and so on and so forth has a very specific effect upon the earth and its creatures. Just to keep that in mind. Okay, let's see where we're at. In astronomical symbolism, the sun entering into the various signs in sequence takes upon itself the phases, attributes, and aspects of those signs through which the solar force was said to be mediated or modified. Therefore, the 12 disciples actually represent the 12 attributes of the Logos, or the sun, both visible and invisible, and should be considered the parts of one being rather than 12 separate beings, each within an arbitrary interpretation of its own. When St. Augustine was asked why 4 of the apostles were especially designated from the rest, he replied that it was necessary that there be 4 principal gospels, because there were 4 corners to the world, thus admitting a relationship between cosmogony and theology. The association of these 4 selected evangelists with certain creatures representing the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac intensifies the relation that we are dealing not with human beings, but with the characters of a sublime cosmologic drama reduced to human estate by the ignorance of clergy and laity alike. Reference has already been made to the fact that the 4 Gospels were themselves contrived, being merely accounts built up from material derived from the Gospel of Matthew. It seems, therefore, that it was necessary to make the 4 Gospels so that the corners of the world would not be left without appropriate representation. There is one other point of interest in this connection. After the perfidy of Judas Iscariot, the number of the apostles was reduced to 11. For this reason, St. Paul was added to the body of the elect to restore the perfect 12. In spite of St. Augustine's opinion, in allowing St. John to be assigned to the constellation of Scorpio, this arrangement was purely symbolical for astronomical purposes. In the original order, Judas Iscariot was Scorpio. After the departure from the 12, therefore, St. Paul assumes the toga of the scorpion. The sign of Scorpio coincided with that season of the year during which initiation was usually given in the greater mysteries. Judas Iscariot is the negative Scorpio, unredeemed. St. Paul is the virtuous Scorpio, the enlightener, and of all the 12, the most likely to have been an initiate of pagan mysteries. Let me just say right there, the sign Scorpio is also, within this philosophy, is also referred to as the serpent. The serpent's a dual symbol. In some of the older manuscripts and illustrations, you will see a serpent with no wings on the bottom and a serpent with wings on the top, and they're each biting each other's tails. So the serpent was always a dual symbol. Think of the Kundalini. When the Kundalini's coiled up at the base of your spine, it's sleeping, right? It's ineffective. And in fact, while in its unenlightened state, it kind of has a negative effect upon you. You use all of its powers towards the negative aspects of what it's there for. When you raise the Kundalini, then you begin to use that serpent energy, the animating principle of life, You begin to direct its usage toward things which will fulfill all of humanity and yourself, right? You're directing it into a virtuous path. Okay, where are we at here? Unredeemed. I'm going to read that part again. The sign of Scorpio coincided with the season of the year during which initiation was usually given in the greater mysteries. Judas Iscariot is the negative Scorpio, unredeemed. St. Paul is the virtuous Scorpio, the enlightener, and of the 12, the most likely to have been an initiate of pagan mysteries. It is therefore appropriate that the most important keys to initiation be found in the New Testament should occur in the writings of Paul, the small one who had become great. Beginning of the Church. It is impossible to date with certainty the true time of the beginning of the Christian Church. It is only possible to specify the principal epochs within the structure of the Church itself. Christianity was punctuated by many councils that directed the whole movement of Christian theology. Presumably, the Church began with Christ. There is no evidence, however, that the chief doctrines of the modern Church, especially with regard to the sacraments, the nature of God, and so forth, were a concern for the first apostles. The Christian Church marched slowly over the background of its time, found increasing favor over a period of centuries, and with the death of Constantine became the ruling power in ecclesiastical Europe. It has been said that Jesus gave the doctrine and Constantine gave the church. This approximately summarizes the matter. The power of the early church lay in its influence over the masses. It was not the faith of the noble during the first centuries, but the faith of the shopkeeper and even the slave. Its power increased through the sheer weight of numbers rather than through special favor by any group. Its early dogmas were uncertain. There was much groping. But after the Council of Nicaea, a certain integration was obvious, and this was the true foundation of the Church. The ante-Nicene period was the period of apology. The great fathers of the time were engaged upon a defensive program. The heathen and the infidel were appropriately stigmatized, but loudest of all arose the cry to be heard and to be given an opportunity to prove the magnificence of the new religious ideal. A number of the old pagans were treated not only with tolerance but with generosity. Hermes met with the approval of the fathers, and Plato's teachings were given considerable attention. After the Nicene Council, apology gave place to diatribe. The early church was more sure of itself. It no longer asked, it demanded. The post-Nicene fathers proclaimed their opinions, whereas earlier writers had advanced theirs with caution. The post-Nicene fathers also had a quicker eye for heresy. A mass of belief was gradually being shaped into a creed to which there must be conformity. There was some confusion in the effort to determine fine points of acceptance or rejection, but the faith was strong with youth and began the moral conquest of Europe, a course which remained unchecked until the Reformation. The Christian Church occupied a unique position in the policies of medieval Europe. It was a sovereignty unto itself, demanding allegiance from all sovereigns. It regarded itself as the ultimate empire, above and beyond all temporal purpose or power. Kings sat upon their thrones because of the favor of the Church, and at the dictates of the Great Mother, king and commoner alike must act. The Reformation brought to an end the Church's dream of temporal power. One after another, the Protestant sects broke away. The Church thundered in vain. Men lost faith with their spiritual leaders because of the numerous occasions on which certain dogmas of theology had been proved fallible. The result is a Christendom divided against itself. What brought about this great change? In the first place, after the birth of science, man became more and more conscious of his physical estate. In the earlier days, physical security was unknown. Plague, pestilence, and war destroyed man. Life was short and the struggle difficult. Printing brought him books, and books brought with him education. Man became aware of the outer world. He lived no more merely in the anteroom of heaven, but in a spacious physical universe in which there was room and opportunity for physical achievement. The church had taught that material life was nothing, that man should be constantly preparing himself for eternity. Exploration enlarged the world. The invention of the telescope and the microscope made man matter conscious. He saw his physical life as significant, and he dreamed of schemes to lengthen it. He sought wealth and position, and refused to continue to regard himself as a sinner merely through the accident of existence. The more he lived in the physical world, the more distant the invisible world became. And by the middle of the 19th century, he focused his attention so completely upon matter that he came even to doubt the existence of those very demons who had plagued his forebears. Thus released and removed from bondage to invisible things that once man had worshipped, theology ceased to fascinate him. This great swing of the pendulum was the inevitable consequence of fanaticism. From one extreme, the mind moves inevitably to the other. The pendulum swings eternally from God to godlessness and back again. As from some strange, fantastic prison, man has emerged from theological domination. Having breathed the atmosphere of freedom of thought, he regards as the most cherished possession of life the right and privilege to order his life by the light of individual reason. And that's going to wrap up chapter 11. Again, I apologize that we had a little hiccup there. Broke that last chapter up into 2 sections on accident because I hit the wrong button. But hey, it's all good. 12 is the last chapter. We're going to maybe crank that one out next, today even. And then we're going to get going on some other really interesting things. So anyway, I won't sit here and talk too much about it. Everybody take care. Thanks again. Like, subscribe, share these to people that you think would get something out of it. But don't force it on people who are not ready yet. Don't cast pearls before swine. All right. Thanks again, everybody. And we'll be back soon. Take care.